I speak with a lot of people, and it's pretty common that they have some kind of inkling of what to look for and what to look out for when it comes to considering a possible solar and battery installation for their home. Sometimes people say they will look at the one-star reviews. Others don't think about doing that. They might look at the reviews, but it is important to especially look at any one-star reviews because, uh, I mean, companies will often ask customers, their happy customers, to leave reviews. So you can find plenty of customers that are happy and that left positive reviews, but it's also important to look at what kind of complaints customers have made, what kind of issues they've had, because the same could happen to you if you became a customer with that company. And oftentimes, what we see is that people that choose to go with a cheap company that typically um, prices systems on the lower end of the market is that these companies tend to not price in after sales support. And so, what happens is if there's an issue, then that's reflected in their reviews by customers saying, "Hey, I've had this issue and I call you up and you don't even respond." And so that's probably the most common overall theme that we see, um, which is why it's so important to check them because then you get an indication of what can happen. Are you actually going to be supported if something goes wrong? And secondly, is the company just taking sort of like a cookie cutter approach where they're just like recommending to get this massive system that's cheap, but is it really bigger than what you actually need? Because what we see is companies like us, they tend to actually not take a cookie cutter approach, but a customized approach where we look at your electricity usage and how that might change into the future. For example, if you get an electric vehicle or if your usage patterns might just change, we assess that to work out what size system would be appropriate to cover that usage now and into the future. Another common issue that we see is the installation quality. So often companies that are cutting corners on price to get a lower price, they're sacrificing on the installation quality. So what we often find is these companies use subcontractors, and so they're rushing to get the job done as quickly as possible um, because they're getting paid a certain set rate. Um, and what that inevitably often leads to is that we see issues like a lot of non-compliant issues where the cabling looks like a spaghetti dinner, where where cabling might not even be in conduit, which is non-compliant. So that can lead to UV exposure of the cables and wear and tear, being damaged by things like vermin, um, uh, water ingress into electrical components. And so that inevitably leads to a shorter system life where the system is failing. And so what that leads to is when the system fails, it means it's obviously not working properly, it's not producing any power, and so then the electricity has to be extracted from the old electrical infrastructure, the 150-year-old poles and wires that exist. And so that means that people have to end up spending more over the long run when they're trying to save money up front, but they just don't really know what they're doing. So they just try to get something like optimize on getting the lowest price, which causes like those kind of issues with the installation quality. Um, yeah, and other we see other breaches of compliance, and so um, some installers, like cheap companies, they might not grind the tiles back. So the way it works with solar panel installations is you take the tiles off the roof if it's a tile roof, and then you grind the slot in the tiles where the feet of the mounting frames will slip under to screw into the battens of the roof. And so if that's not done, what that means is the tile is sitting loosely on the feet of that mounting frame, and it's not locked in securely around a slot in it, and so that can cause it to rattle and become brittle and break over time, and that causes water ingress into the roof, which leads to mold, structural damage, which can be very expensive to fix. And then another common issue is the product quality and long-term reliability. So any product installed in Australia needs to be able to is approved by the Clean Energy Council. So it needs to have a 10-year warranty for batteries, and the warranty for the panels is typically for 25 years. But what we often see is that the warranty is only as good as the likelihood of the company to stay in business, how and that's affected a lot by how much margins it has, which affects its long-term sustainability. Is it running on thin margins or sustainable, like more sizable margins to be able to support its staff, in-house staff, not just subcontractors? And so when if the manufacturer is also pricing on the cheaper end of the market, that leads to attracts this installation ecosystem of companies that are also optimizing on getting the lowest price, and so that causes this cost cutting that I spoke about. And with cost cutting from the manufacturer, that typically causes a higher risk of less long term reliability, meaning that you know again, if the system is failing or having issues or it's just not functioning as well, then it causes less savings over the long term, less performance. And we have seen a lot of solar installation companies and manufacturers go out of business over the last 15 years. In fact, 700 companies went out of business between 2011 and 2019. So we're not talking small numbers here. And so all of the people that had systems installed by those companies, when the system fails, then they've had to go to another company to get it replaced, really, because no solar company generally wants to take on liability for trying to fix a system installed by another company. It's the same for individual electricians as well. So it just ends up getting replaced, which ends up costing more. So just to recap, what I've covered of the common warning signs to look out for is the how with the 1-star reviews of companies, it's important to assess those so you can gauge what the company is like in terms of their after sales support, their installation quality, and their product quality, and its long-term sustainability, like its a likelihood of its long-term sustainability, its ability to stay in business for the long term and actually honor warranties for customers. And to be frank, what we often see is companies that offer zero to minimal after-sales support when something goes wrong is they call them up, and even though they're still in business, they don't even answer the phone to fix issues, so they have to go to another company to get it fixed or replaced. So the old adage applies: you pay for what you get. Another common saying we have in trades is that tradespeople say is, you pay cheap, you pay twice, and a poor man pays twice. In addition to looking at 1-star reviews, it's also good to look on Facebook pages like Crap Solar and Crap Home Battery Installations, because that can give you, indication of the worst case that can happen, worst case scenarios that can happen when with solar and battery installations, when what can go wrong. It's pretty depressing, but it's important to be mindful of that, because yeah, things can and have gone wrong, as you can see on those pages. So in summary, when looking at adding solar and batteries to your home, choose wisely. You can choose to get something cheap, or you can choose to optimize for something that's you can have more certainty about being more reliable and having the right amount of support for the long term.